over the next half an hour, I'm going to limit myself to half an hour, I want to really do 4 major things. First of all, give you a little bit of contemporary rationale for this paper that I've written. Secondly, explore the origins and characteristics of this special bilateral relationship. Thirdly, I want to explain, particularly to the people from Cyprus who are in this room, that the UK is not the devil that they're sometimes portrayed. And I want to illustrate that point with reference to the de facto partition. Well, I don't want to get too bogged down into the Cyprus problem. And fourthly, I want to offer some practical suggestions as to how the bilateral relationship may be strengthened for the benefit of both countries. Let's now look at the rationale, therefore, for the paper. And I offer 5 thoughts here. I'm on page 3 if anybody wants to follow my train of thought with the reference to the document. The rationale. Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, 50 years have now elapsed since the Republic of Cyprus was established in extraordinary circumstances in 1960. When the United Kingdom, I was about to say gave independence to the Republic, when the United Kingdom established the Republic under the terms of the Cyprus Act, not the Cyprus Independence Act, under the terms of the Cyprus Act, a piece of domestic legislation, and under the terms of the Treaty of Establishment, a piece of international legislation, the United Kingdom was locked into the infrastructure of the Republic of Cyprus. As you know, under the terms of the Treaty of Establishment, the UK retained its 2 sovereign base areas, together with rights spread across the island and various retained sites. And the UK was also built into this extraordinary guarantee arrangement under the Treaty of Guarantee. And that state of affairs prevails to this day. The UK is locked in to the infrastructure of the Republic and the island of which the Republic forms part. The second rationale for this paper is to do with what happened earlier on in the summer, a little bit to the east of here, with the episode off Gaza. Now, it's very easy to talk about turning points and rather than milestones. Perhaps I think this was a milestone rather than a turning point, although the media dressed it up as a turning point. You'll recall what happened, that there was this flotilla that approached Gaza, and the Israelis attacked it. A number of people were killed, and it resulted in a loss of blood and a rupture in Turkey's relations with Israel. According to Mr. Erdogan, the Prime Minister of Turkey, today, and I think this was the 1st of June, today is a turning point. They, the Israelis, once again showed their ability to perpetrate slaughters. We, the Turks, warn Israel not to test Turkey's patience. This bloody massacre, he also said Israel had to be punished, absolutely, by all means. This bloody massacre by Israel on ships that were taking humanitarian aid to Gaza deserves every kind of curse. The Guardian reported at the time that Turkish analysts viewed the flotilla attack as a tipping point in the balance of power in the Middle East, with Turkey finally forfeiting its strategic links with an emerging regional power. And one of these analysts, Hugh Pope of the International Crisis Group and a veteran observer of Turkish affairs, reportedly said that we're moving into a new era. Other commentators have suggested that the episode of Gaza was merely a pretext for Turkey to cement its increasingly Islamist profile, to step up its campaign to become a leader of the Islamic world, and to promote its aim of re-emerging as a major power. Now, I'm not going to show you every single one of these slides, but I just wanted to show you this. This is a speech given by Mr., or rather I should say Professor Davutoglu, the Turkish Foreign Minister, last year in Damascus, of all places. As a matter of fact, he stated, we observe gradually the restoration of a strong Islamic identity and self-perception. A new geostrategic, geopolitical and geoeconomic culture is emerging in the Muslim world, a fundamental characteristic of which can be identified as plurality within the unity. It is incumbent on us to project the true image of Islam and protect it from defamation. Time will tell as to whether this ideology of Professor Davutoglu is entrenched in the Turkish culture and lives beyond his tenure as foreign minister. But I'd encourage everybody to read the book that he wrote a few years ago called Strategic Depth, which has now been published in Greek. I'm trying to make my way through the Greek edition. It's not, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been published in English. But if you go to the website of the Turkish Foreign Ministry, you can read Davutoglu's speeches, which are very clear, and they demonstrate that he is a sharp cookie who's developing a strategy, if I may use that word, to ensure that Turkey develops it into a major power. And the Republic should take note, and the United Kingdom should take note. Side by side with the Gaza incident, Turkey, as we know, has been developing a relationship with Iran, or I should say the Islamic Republic of Iran, as well as with the Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Our Defence Secretary in the UK, Dr. Liam Fox, has reportedly said in July of this year that there's a real risk of nuclear proliferation in the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East. I quote from Dr. Fox, as reported by the BBC, "Should Iran become a new nuclear weapon state, Saudi Arabia, Egypt and Turkey would likely to follow suit, and we could see ourselves in a new nuclear arms race." Dr. Fox made a similar point in the House of Commons in 2009 when he was Shadow Defence Secretary. So that observation to the BBC wasn't an idle comment. It's something that's in Dr. Fox's mind. I'm not privy to any secrets or details, but that's something that should concern us in the UK, and it's something that should concern us in the Republic of Cyprus, in view of the location of the Republic of Cyprus. The third rationale for the paper and the need, as I see it, for a closer bilateral relationship is that the Republic, as we know, remains under ongoing military occupation by Turkey in breach of international law. Now, we know that British ministers don't like using the words invasion and occupation, but we have three branches of government in the United Kingdom: the executive, the Parliament, the legislature, and the judiciary. And our judges in the UK have, on a number of separate occasions, including this year in the Apostolidis and Orom's case, used the words invasion and occupation. And I'm going to use them as well, because if our great judges in the UK use the words, I'm going to use them too. The Republic remains subject to an invasion and an occupation, and by the look of it, the Turkish military doesn't look as though it wants to change its approach. Now, I said I wasn't going to use every single one of these slides, but here's another one. This is a transcript, or taken from the transcript of a speech given by the then commander of the Turkish Armed Forces, General Özkok, in 2005. And this is taken from the official website of the Turkish Armed Forces. And it's still there. And according to the General, Cyprus represents one of the main issues about which our concern shall never decrease. He went on to say that the importance of Cyprus to Turkey from the security point of view is based on two fundamental principles. Two. The first is the security responsibility which Turkey has to their Cypriot kinsmen, as he put it, and he links that point to the Treaty of Guarantee. And the second security connection that Turkey has with the island of Cyprus is the strategic role that Cyprus plays in terms of the security of Turkey, as he says, clearly expressed in the Treaties of Guarantee and Alliance. These two principles, he comments, have continuity, since stability and balance in Cyprus and the Eastern Mediterranean can only be ensured in this way. Now, I'm starting to plough through Professor Davutoglu's excellent book, though I disagree with a lot of what he says. And in the passage devoted to Cyprus, he makes the very same twofold approach. It's very difficult to see any difference between the traditional Kemalist militaristic approach of the general and his colleagues and the more politically flavoured approach of Professor Davutoglu, save in one material respect. In Professor Davutoglu's book, he refers to the Turkish Islamic Cypriots. The use of the qualifying word Islamic, of course, doesn't appear in any of the military literature that you find from the Turkish armed forces, and that gives you a little bit of an insight into the Turkish approach to this island and the region as a whole. So that's the third rationale for my paper, the emergence of Turkey and its presence here and what seems to be its perpetual presence, which they do not wish to see extinguished under any circumstances. The fourth rationale for the paper relates to the United Kingdom and our politics over there, which we've already alluded to earlier on today. And perhaps I can show you this map here. This was from the Army website of the UK, and it shows you Operation Telic, which has now come to an end in Iraq, and Herrick, the operation in Afghanistan, which is ongoing. The UK, over the past few years, has been engaged in two major operations, in two key battlegrounds. And yet, over the past few years, thanks in large part to Messrs. Blair and Brown, our armed forces have been effectively overstretched and underfunded. That's the allegation. Labour ministers or ex-Labour ministers would disagree with that assertion, but it's an assertion that I subscribe to. And I picked up the Sunday Telegraph at the newsagents in Larnaca on Sunday, and General Dannett, the retired Chief of the General Staff, is publishing his memoirs, and on the front page the Daily Telegraph reports on those memoirs, and the allegation is as follows: how Blair and Brown betrayed our troops. Over the last 10 or 12 years, in spite of these massive operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the armed forces and their budgets have been subject to colossal pressure. And what we're now seeing in the United Kingdom is a strategic defence and security review, an alleged strategic defence and security review, which is taking place at exactly the same time as a comprehensive spending review. And as I've concluded, I've written a paper on this separately, as I've concluded, the strategic defence and security review is really camouflage to enable the politicians to rationalise deep cuts to the armed forces once the spending review is published in October. The political context to this, or rather the economic context to this, is the whopping great deficit and national debt that the outgoing Labour government left behind. On page 4 you can see some of the statistics there. Labour mismanaged our economy. They spent wildly and excessively. They allowed the social security budget to spiral out of control. They didn't control the banks properly. Their financial services infrastructure didn't work. The banks collapsed, or 5 or 6 of the banks collapsed. We, the taxpayer, rescued the banks. And as a consequence of all that, we, the taxpayer, are having to pay the consequence, and the armed forces are going to bear the brunt of it, it seems, once the Strategic Defence Review is published later this year. I bought the Daily Mail, which I don't normally do in the UK, but it's cheaper than the Times and the Telegraph on weekdays in Larnaca. And what do I find? Max Hastings, former editor of the Telegraph, distinguished historian and pundit, claiming that these cuts could leave Britain defended by rowing boats, air-fixed jets and girl guides. That's the Daily Mail of September the 9th, yesterday. So Cyprus is rather weak and impoverished armed forces, may one day be able to compete with the rowing boats. That's an exaggeration, of course, but the point that I'm trying to bring across to you is that the United Kingdom may not remain the great power that it once was, and it may very well be on the slide. As we were saying the other day, it may still, it may be at the stage where the Roman Empire was in 300 or so AD. I hope that isn't the case, but I rather fear it is. Everybody here in Cyprus should take note of that. Can I just ask the question, for those of you who are permanent residents here, does the local media pick up on this? Has it been reporting on the Strategic Defence Review and the collapse? Not really.
It doesn't affect the SBA then?
There's no interest.
It's economic.
It doesn't have anything. Okay. Well, it may affect the SBAs in two ways. I'm just speculating it. One is that they may run out of money, and the Prime Minister says, "Well, there's no rationale for Decalia in particular, and let's discard them and put pressure on Christofias and Talat, or not Mr. Talat, Mr. Dr. Eroglu, to reach a deal, and then we can cast off these relics of empire and spend less money on them and less money on UNFICYP." That's maybe what they're saying. I'm just purely speculating here. The other reason where the SBAs may be affected is that the UK will have, if they've got no armed forces and no global aspirations and no need to fight anymore in Afghanistan or Iraq. Iraq's already closed. Afghanistan is due to close in 2015. Well, we don't need Akrotiri for long-range operational deployments. I'm speculating, I emphasise, but I can imagine these discussions are taking place in Whitehall. So the SBAs may be affected directly with, say, the closure of Decalia. They may be affected indirectly because their significance to the UK may be diminished. And in the question and answer session, perhaps we can return to that theme and explore it. But I would urge everybody here in Cyprus to think about this. Well, what if Decalia is shut down? What if the British have no need for the island anymore? What if they retreat into their shell and become the equivalent? I'm going to mention a country. Hopefully there's nobody from that country here. Belgium, which used to be an empire. Used to have Congo and a few other places, and just squabbling among themselves. They're about to collapse as well, aren't they? We may collapse with Scottish devolution. Who knows? That's what could happen to the UK. What does it care? Do people here care? Everyone here wants the British to go, don't they? I used to think that, and my heart says, yeah, kick the Brits out. But my point is, let's think about this a bit more seriously and with a bit of sophistication before we allow our emotions and our knee-jerkery to take over. Which brings me neatly to the fifth of the reasons for this paper, and that is that President Christofias and Dr. Eroglu are embarking upon yet another series of secret meetings with the stated aim of negotiating a settlement to the long-standing Cyprus question. How does this affect the British and the special relationship? Well, firstly, the British, as we've said, are locked into the infrastructure of the Republic, and it's inconceivable that President Christofias and Mr. Dr. Eroglu will not discuss the Treaty of Establishment and the Treaty of Guarantee, to which the UK is signed up to. More broadly, and I've made this point on previous occasions and I won't develop it much today, is that we could very well see a bizonal, bicommunal federation established here, or as I like to call it, a racially based, racially defined and religiously expressed bizonal, bicommunal federation, which sees the fragmentation, or the formal fragmentation, of the Republic into Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot constituent states. That's fantastic from the British point of view in one sense, because it means there'll be a settlement, there'll be a rationale for withdrawing from UNFICYP and spending less money on UNFICYP. There's a rationale for maybe surrendering land and casting off Decalia. But is that really in British interests? I've taken the view that that would be a catastrophe for the UK and for the European Union. Firstly, because it would legitimise the fragmentation of a state as a consequence of a use of force, which would damage the reputation of the UK as a guardian of the rule of law. Secondly, this is my view, you may disagree with it, the establishment of a racially based and religiously expressed bizonal, bicommunal federation will set a very dangerous precedent within the European Union when there are rising numbers of Muslims and other minorities in the European Union. The Muslim population of the UK has increased from 1.6% 10 years ago to 2.7 today, and it's rising. Do we want to set up a precedent whereby a religious community, religiously phrased ethnic community, because that's how they defined in the 1960 Constitution, do we want a religiously expressed community to acquire the right to set up their own homeland? I pose that as a question. And thirdly, if this bizonal, bicommunal federation legitimizes, or rather seeks to legitimize, restrictions on individual freedom on the basis of ethnicity or religion, if it seeks to restrict the ability of people to do things such as buy property or move freely on the basis of their religion or ethnicity, is that not the equivalent of legitimizing discrimination? Is that not the same as eroding the rule of law and one of its fundamental principles, which is that there should be equality under the law? In my view, that is exactly what a bizonal, bicommunal federation would produce. And that would be devastating for the UK as a great guardian of the rule of law. Let me move on to offer you some concluding thoughts and suggestions for the future. I won't go into great detail on the characteristics of the relationship, which I've sort of already outlined. Let me just offer you these thoughts. I'm not, yes, page 13. Let me now spring to the defence of the UK. The UK, and this needs to be developed, this theme that I'm going to put to you today. The UK is, as we said, locked into the infrastructure of the Republic by virtue of that 1960 Treaty of Establishment and Treaty of Guarantee. It's also locked into the Republic by virtue of the interest, the strategic interest that the UK have within the Republic. How do you, I'm not privy to any secrets, but having seen some of the declassified material from the earlier periods, having read the newspapers and seen now the wonderful websites the British government has and parliamentary records, if you're operating over here in Afghanistan and in Iraq, well, how do you take your heavy kit there? How do you take your armed forces there? You either do it through the sea or through the air. And in the 19th century, Benjamin Disraeli said that Cyprus was the key to Western Asia. And by the same token, if Cyprus is the key to Western Asia, Egypt is the keyhole. A, in terms of the Suez Canal for ships, B, in terms of airspace. Now, because of that, over the last 30 years in particular, the United Kingdom has, it seems pretty clear to me, adopted a twin-track approach to Cyprus. On the one hand, the United Kingdom has done nothing to stop Turkey achieving its strategic objectives. 1974, as we've said, the UK didn't honour its guarantee. But on the other hand, now 99% of the media attention here in Cyprus focuses on that fact, doesn't it? The British didn't honour their undertaking. But equally, the United Kingdom, and this really ought to be remembered, never and has never recognised the purported UDI in the occupied area. It engineered Resolution 541, I think it was, which branded the secession as invalid. Why? Well, one reason, I suspect, is because the UK is a guardian of international law. Remember, the UK founded or helped to found the United Nations. They were instrumental behind the Nuremberg Tribunal. They pushed through the European Convention of Human Rights. And the British, notwithstanding Suez and Iraq, have been champions of the the rule of law on the international sphere. That's partly because the rule of law is good for security, because it promotes stability. But the British, as I see it, have not recognised the Republic because they want to ensure that these principles, these cardinal principles of international law, remain in place. You cannot acquire sovereignty through the use of force and the conquest of territory in breach of the UN Charter. But there's a second reason why the British haven't, in my view, recognised the occupied area as a separate sovereign state, and that's because if the British did that, the 1960 arrangements would just unravel, and the rationale, the legal rationale for the British presence here would be undermined. Similarly, the Turkish guarantee, because remember the Treaty of Guarantee doesn't just guarantee the security of the Republic, it guarantees the availability of the SBAs and the retained sites to the UK. Look at Article 2 of the Treaty of Guarantee. The British do not want to see, or hitherto they have not wanted to see, the 1960 treaties unravel, which they would in the event of recognition. And those 2 points, ladies and gentlemen, I may be wrong, and I said I'm not privy to inside documentation. Those 2 thoughts are, I think, quite significant. And when you hear these scare stories in the media that the British may formally recognise the Republic, I would cast doubt on the validity of those assertions. Maybe they're just an example of psychological warfare by stealth. I just want to make one other point on this with regard to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, as we've said earlier, does not just consist of the executive and legislative branches of government, which are dominated by the Office of Prime Minister. We have a third branch of government, the judiciary, which we often overlook. I know there are 1 or 2 lawyers here in Cyprus, but does the local media think about the judiciary as being an integral part of the UK? It's sort of, we just think the UK is the Prime Minister and that's it, and the Foreign Office and the British High Commission perhaps. But it goes beyond that into the third branch of government, the judiciary, and we have a number of cases, including the Apostolidis case, which have really underlined a number of fundamental principles. I'm on page 13 of my notes, and you'll see there I have a reference there to the judgment of the Court of Appeal in Apostolidis Honorums. The primary importance of that case is to do with the enforcement of a judgment of the court in Nicosia in the United Kingdom. But one of the other reasons that case is important, which again the media didn't seem to grasp when the case was reported, was what the judge said in relation to the Treaty of Guarantee. By way of backdrop, the Court of Appeal affirmed that there had been an invasion and occupation. Those words were used by the Court of Appeal and by Lord Justice Pill in particular. But he went on to engage in a discussion on the Treaty of Guarantee in response to Cherie Booth's QC's argument that the public policy considerations should be taken into account by the Court of Appeal. I won't go into the legal details. The point is that the judge referred to the Treaty of Guarantee in reaching his decision, and he referred to the United Kingdom as having a subsisting obligation under the Treaty of Guarantee to maintain the security, territorial integrity and independence of the Republic of Cyprus. And that's a very important point. It's on page 10, that particular point. This is what the judge said. The paragraph 34 on page 10. The independence, territorial integrity and security of the Republic of Cyprus was recognised and indeed guaranteed by the UK in the Treaty of Guarantee. Moreover, by a succession of Security Council resolutions consistently reaffirmed, all states are called upon to respect the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity and non-alignment of the Republic of Cyprus. Now, again, without going into the details, the judge took that into account in reaching his decision, which was that the judgment of the court in Nicosia could be enforced in London. And he went on to say that on account of the Treaty of Guarantee and the various UN resolutions, the UK remains under a subsisting, that means ongoing, subsisting obligation to respect the sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of the Republic. Hence the outcome of the case. So what does that say to us? Well, that together with a number of other cases, such as the one to do with the attempt to procure direct flights into the occupied area, which went to the High Court, that case together with others has enabled the Republic to continue to assert sovereignty, if not control sovereignty over the occupied area. And that's a terribly important point, and it's thanks to the UK. It's thanks partly to the Foreign Office, because they engineered Resolution 541 back in 1983, and it's thanks in part to the judiciary as a consequence of these cases, which have affirmed the reality, the legal reality, here on the island of Cyprus. So that's a really key point that I want you to grasp. On page 15, I'm conscious of the time, on page 15 I also make a number of other points. The relationship is special for reasons beyond the 1960 treaties. 3 of the 6 presidents of the Republic were called to the bar by Gray's Inn in London during the 1950s, believe it or not. We have an estimated 60,000 British nationals resident in the south of Cyprus, as the Foreign Office puts it. Half of those are dual nationals. Cyprus has the 7th largest concentration of British nationals overseas after Spain, France, Germany, Ireland and Italy. The UK includes 63,000 people who were born in Cyprus. This puts Cyprus in 28th place in the league table of the 60 most common countries of birth in the UK. India, Poland, Pakistan, Republic of Ireland, Germany, South Africa, Bangladesh, the USA, Nigeria, Kenya are at the top of the league table. According to the Office of National Statistics, Cyprus in 2000 was the 8th most popular destination for UK tourists. The UK is the Republic's 3rd largest trading partner, and then there are people like me who are British, born in the UK, love the UK, but have a symbiotic relationship with the Republic because of our roots. And we're troublemakers for the Foreign Office and for the British government, because we're educated, we're proud of our British education, and we use that British education to try and impede British policy to impose an un-British settlement. And we're actually acting in British interests, because I take the view that my philosophy is in British interests, although the British haven't yet grasped the point. At least the political and diplomatic sides haven't grasped the point. And I make that point because my grandfather's generation, my grandfather was in Cyprus in 59-60. He opposed the Zurich-London agreements. But my grandfather was a barber by profession, and he went into the rag trade. And he was at the heart of the Greek community in London at the time. Most of the Greeks, Cypriots in London at the time, were immigrants who spoke limited English. They were barbers, they had fish and chip shops. They weren't in the professions. Our generation, we've had the privilege of an education, hard-working parents, and we've become lawyers, we've become academics, we've become doctors, and we're in a much better position to ensure that the Greek Cypriot diaspora is part of the campaign, if I can use that word, to ensure that the rule of law is preserved here in Cyprus. And that's a major development over the past 50 years. As I said, 50 years ago there wasn't that diaspora that the Republic could fall back on. Now there is. Page 16, some quick points here. What should happen in the future? Well, I make the point that the UK should do more to promote the rule of law and explain what the rule of law means, and the judiciary may have a role to play there. The legal profession does, and I'm going to hopefully stir up the legal profession in the UK to get more involved. Our judges have been fantastic, though, in terms of articulating what the rule of law means. I refer you all to Lord Bingham's new book, The Rule of Law, and the speeches of Lord Phillips, Lord Newburger, the Master of the Rolls, and others. A couple of other points. Going back to the Strategic Defence Review. The UK, this is paragraph 64 on page 16, the UK, in my view, should ensure that the Strategic Defence Review refers to the Treaty of Guarantee and ensures that the UK is in a position to honour the guarantee. Now, leave aside Turkey. We've heard earlier about Iran. We know about the other risks to national security that may emerge from the Eastern Mediterranean. The UK, according to the Treaty of Guarantee, which, by the way, I'd like to see swept away at some point, but in the meantime, we have Article 2, which says that the UK is under an obligation to guarantee the independence, territorial integrity and security of the Republic. And that, according to the Court of Appeal, is a subsisting obligation. So the Strategic Defence and Security Review must, in my view, ensure that the UK is in a position to spring to the defence of the Republic and protect that independence, territorial integrity and security. We'll see whether that happens. The other thing that the UK should do is, now that the operation in Iraq has come to an end, the UK should formally give a vote of thanks to the Republic for all of the assistance it provided during those 8 or 9 years. As far as I'm aware, 6 years. As far as I'm aware, there hasn't been a public expression of thanks in the House of Commons. I remember even at the time of the Lebanon crisis in July of 2006, the Republic opened its ports, as it was obliged to do under the Treaty of Establishment, I might add. But it opened its ports and it assisted the UK. The US offered a vote of thanks through its ambassador. The Prime Minister in the House of Commons had a chance in question time. The Foreign Secretary, Margaret Beckett, had a chance in the debate they had over Lebanon to say something about the assistance that Cyprus offered. There was nothing said. And why was that? These are the failings of politicians. That gesture would be, I think, would generate such goodwill here on the island. So that's what the UK should do. Looking at the Republic, well, what should the Republic... for one final point, the UK should ensure that there's an independent Republic of Cyprus which might act in the future as a counterpoint to any adverse developments in Turkey. And that leads me to that point about the Bizonal Federation, which should be kicked into touch. And the Republic, what should the Republic do? It should recognise that it's left the non-aligned movement. It's now part of the European Union. It's effectively part of the Euro-Atlantic Alliance. It's not a member of NATO. It should think about joining NATO. I'm in two minds. I take the view that perhaps non-membership of NATO may be in the interests of the Republic, and also in British interests, for various reasons. It gives Cyprus sort of a rather clean image in the dealings with the countries to the east. That may be in the West's interest, to have a non-NATO Cyprus locked into the European Union, but outside NATO. But that's for the Republic to think seriously about. However, on the other hand, I take the view that the Republic should apply to join Partnership for Peace in the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council. Why is it, as far as I'm aware, and I know Dr. Levendiz is here, who's more of an expert on this, why is it that the Republic is the only member state of the European Union that isn't a member of those two bodies? It seems to me bizarre. And that's maybe something to do with the Cold War mindset of the lingering Cold War mindset one finds here. Beyond Europe, the Republic and the UK should look east. We've got these emerging powers in China and India and Russia to the north. There needs to be thought given to how the Republic develops its global connections. I find it bizarre that last year the Republic chose to open an embassy in Cuba, a dictatorship, led by Castro, that was brother. And it doesn't, as far as I'm aware, have a physical ambassadorial presence in two members of the G8, namely Canada, which is served by Washington, D.C., and Japan, which is served from Beijing. Well, that seems bizarre, doesn't it? If the Republic is going to grow up in the world...
They're not communists.
That takes me back to the title of my talk. A new mindset is needed. The Cold War has come to an end. And of course that decision to go to Cuba was a little bit bizarre, given the fact that there are large numbers of Cuban American senators and congressmen who support the cause of Cyprus, and they were put in a very embarrassing position, having to justify their relationship with the Republic of Cyprus. Remember how the Americans think. You know, if you live in Iowa, You think that Missouri is sort of on a different planet. Here you had Latin American congressmen of Cuban extraction or supporting the Republic of Cyprus, an island miles away, and they suddenly wake up to discover that the president of the Republic of Cyprus has gone to Cuba and decided to open an embassy there. So there needs to be a waking up here in Cyprus, and that's going to take time, and the younger generation gradually coming into power in Cyprus to a far greater extent than before. Okay, not entirely, but gradually they'll come to power. A couple of other suggestions. India, natural partner for the UK and Cyprus. Think of the Commonwealth. Not enough, as far as I can see, has been done to take advantage of the status of Malta and Cyprus and the UK as members of the Commonwealth and the EU. Leave aside strategy and politics. Educational, cultural and other trading ties should be built up between those three countries and India. And more broad, I'd rope in the Irish here. The countries that were formerly under British rule, Ireland, Malta, Cyprus and the UK, should form a club within the club within the EU, and try and do more to support one another and promote their interest in and beyond the European Union. I mean, my ideas need to be fleshed out, but I just want to plant some seeds here and get people thinking about this. But for all of this to happen, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm reaching rapidly towards the end, for all of this to happen, there needs to be a change of mindset in London and in Cyprus. And I've given you all of these ideas, and in my paper, pages 6 and 7, I'm going to go through them, I've listed a number of fundamental questions that need to be addressed. Should the Cyprus Republic apply to join NATO? Should it apply to join Partnership for Peace? What should happen to the Treaty of Establishment and the Treaty of Guarantee and the Treaty of Alliance? Should the status of the British presence be altered? If so, how? Should the British military presence be encouraged to stay? How can there be military cooperation between the UK and the Republic? What should happen to in relation to nuclear strategy? How can the UK, or should the UK be involved in Cyprus in terms of protecting it from any emerging nuclear or non-nuclear threat? There's a whole host of questions I've posed there. These questions need to be addressed now, before there's a settlement, not afterwards. Are these questions being discussed and agreed? Or are they just muddling through and hoping to reach a settlement? And there needs to be clear strategic thinking, clear strategic planning, and I would encourage everybody here to encourage their leaders to do that. I rather fear, rather like David Cameron, the 5-year plan for Afghanistan, that our politicians here are just blinded by the next general election, the hope of a Nobel Peace Prize, and carving their name into history. So, by way of conclusion, there's a lovely passage here from Hansard in 1994. David Davis, who was now rather a renegade Conservative MP, was a Minister of State at the Foreign Office, and he made the following point. Cyprus is important to the United Kingdom. Our countries are bound by shared history and personalities and common political interests. Our common history gives us shared values and outlooks, and we are bound together in the Commonwealth, and now in the European Union. Cyprus is one of the major British tourist destinations, and the integration of Cypriots in Britain, especially here in London, proves the closeness of the relationship. It is also fair to say that our two sovereign bases in Cyprus are strategically important to Britain, as was demonstrated clearly during the Gulf War of 90 to 91 and subsequently by Iraq and Afghanistan. So I hope the bilateral relationship will be strengthened. I hope that the British will try and review their policy towards Cyprus. It's a tall order, but I hope that happens. I hope that the Republic reviews its relationship with the Republic. It's a tall order. I hope that happens. I began with Zeno of Citium, follow where reason leads. But as I finished this paper in Lord Byron Street, perhaps I should finish with Lord Byron. He once wrote, "Those who will not reason are bigots. Those who cannot reason are fools, and those who dare not reason are slaves." Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.